In this episode, we take what can feel like three separate piles of exam material and turn them into one simple mental movie you can replay anytime you feel lost. When beginners look at domains, it is easy to assume they are three disconnected subjects you study one by one, but auditors do not experience the world that way. In real work, an audit is a journey that starts with understanding what a system is and why it exists, moves through how it is controlled and operated, and ends with how it is monitored, improved, and governed over time. The three domains are basically that journey, broken into categories so they can be tested clearly. When you connect them into a single workflow, you stop memorizing and start understanding. By the end, you should be able to hear any AI story and immediately know which domain questions to ask first, which to ask next, and what good evidence would look like. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A useful workflow begins with a simple truth. You cannot audit what you cannot describe, and you cannot describe what you do not understand at a basic level. That is why the first part of the workflow is always about getting oriented to the AI system itself, including what it is supposed to do, what data it uses, and what kind of decisions it influences. This is where Domain 1 thinking shows up, because Domain 1 is largely about foundational understanding and evaluation of AI solutions and their impacts. Beginners sometimes worry that this means you must become a data scientist, but the goal is different. You are learning how to ask questions that clarify purpose, scope, boundaries, and assumptions so you can audit responsibly. If you can explain the model's role in plain language, you are already doing audit work, because clarity is the starting point for accountability and evidence. Once you are oriented, the next step is to translate the story you heard into audit terms, which means turning vague promises into requirements and measurable expectations. A stakeholder might say the AI system improves efficiency, reduces risk, or makes better decisions, but an auditor hears those as claims that must be supported. This is the bridge between Domain 1 and Domain 2 thinking, because you begin with the nature of the system and then move into how it should be designed and controlled. You take the business goal and ask what success means, what failure looks like, and what constraints must be respected, such as safety, privacy, fairness, and reliability. Requirements matter because they become the standard you audit against later. Without requirements, everything becomes opinion, and audits are not built on opinion. This step makes the later evidence gathering feel logical instead of random. After requirements come controls, because controls are how an organization makes its requirements real in daily operations. Controls can be policies, review steps, approvals, monitoring triggers, documentation standards, and human oversight practices that prevent harm and catch mistakes early. This is where Domain 2 tends to dominate the workflow, because Domain 2 focuses on governance, risk, and control ideas that surround AI initiatives and make them trustworthy. Think of Domain 2 as the part of the journey where you ask how the organization keeps the AI system from drifting into unsafe or unapproved behavior. A beginner-friendly way to picture this is to imagine a kitchen with a recipe and a set of hygiene rules. The recipe is the requirement, and the hygiene rules are controls that keep the process safe and repeatable. The audit mindset is to verify that both exist, that they are followed, and that someone is responsible for enforcing them when pressure rises. Now we can assemble the workflow into a clean sequence that you can use on exam questions. First, identify the AI system, its purpose, and its context, which is Domain 1 thinking, because it focuses on what the system is and what impacts it may have. Second, identify what the organization says it is trying to achieve and what constraints apply. Then confirm those expectations are documented, which pulls you toward Domain 2 thinking, because governance turns goals into accountability. Third, evaluate how the system is built, deployed, and operated with controls that match the stated risks and requirements, which is also heavily Domain 2. Fourth, verify that the organization monitors performance, responds to issues, and improves the system over time, which brings Domain 3 into the workflow because sustained oversight and assurance live there. When you practice this sequence, the domains become stages, not topics. You can then answer questions by asking where you are in the journey and what the next responsible audit action would be. Domain 1 is often easiest to misunderstand, so let's make its role in the workflow feel concrete. Domain 1 is where you learn to recognize what kind of AI is being used, what data flows matter, and what impacts might be created for people, systems, and decisions. When a question describes a model that recommends actions, flags anomalies, or ranks options, Domain 1 asks you to think about what the model is trained on, what it outputs, and how those outputs are used. It also pushes you to think about impacts beyond pure accuracy, such as whether the system could produce unsafe outcomes, unfair outcomes, or misleading confidence. Beginners sometimes focus only on whether the model works, but audit thinking includes whether it works in the right way, in the right context, for the right reasons. Domain 1 is where you build the vocabulary and judgment to understand the AI story well enough to audit it without guessing. Domain 2 then takes that understanding and forces it into organizational reality, where every important system needs governance. Governance means someone owns the risk, someone defines what acceptable behavior is, and someone decides what happens when things go wrong. In workflow terms, this is where you look for decision rights, approvals, documentation, and oversight mechanisms that prove the organization is not operating on hope. Domain 2 questions often feel like they are about policies, but the real idea is control design and control effectiveness. A policy on paper does not protect anyone if nobody follows it, and an audit looks for evidence that the controls are operating, not just existing. Domain 2 also connects strongly to risk assessment, because controls should match risk, not convenience. If the AI system can meaningfully affect customers, money, safety, or legal exposure, the controls should be stronger and more visible. This domain rewards the habit of asking who, what, when, and how, and then verifying those answers with artifacts. Domain 3 completes the workflow by focusing on ongoing assurance, monitoring, and improvement, because AI systems can change even when nobody touches them. Data changes, user behavior changes, the environment changes, and models can degrade quietly over time. In workflow terms, Domain 3 is where you check whether performance is measured, whether issues are detected early, whether there are escalation paths, and whether corrective actions are tracked to completion. This is also where you pay attention to incident handling and the organization's ability to respond to unexpected outcomes. For beginners, it helps to think of Domain 3 as the difference between building a bridge and keeping a bridge safe for 10 years. Building is important, but monitoring, inspections, repairs, and clear accountability over time are what prevent disasters. Domain 3 questions often reward answers that emphasize continuous oversight, evidence of monitoring, and feedback loops that lead to improvements instead of repeated failures. To see the full workflow in action, imagine a simple scenario where an organization uses AI to prioritize customer support tickets. Domain 1 thinking asks what the model is using as input, what output it produces, and what impacts it might have, such as delaying urgent tickets or unfairly deprioritizing certain customers. Domain 2 thinking asks whether the organization defined what a correct prioritization looks like, whether it tested the approach, and whether it has controls like review processes, clear ownership, and documented thresholds for acceptable error. Domain 3 thinking asks whether the organization monitors real-world performance, detects drift, and adjusts when patterns change, such as a new product launch creating new types of urgent tickets. Notice how the same system is viewed through 3 lenses that form one story: understand, control, sustain. On the exam, you can often identify the best answer by asking which part of that story the question is currently describing and what a responsible auditor would do next. This workflow also helps you handle the tricky exam experience where multiple answers seem reasonable. If you do not have a workflow, you might choose an answer that sounds smart but belongs to the wrong stage of the journey. For example, jumping straight to monitoring controls when the organization has not even documented requirements is like installing smoke detectors before building the house. Monitoring matters, but it cannot replace clear expectations and ownership. Similarly, focusing on technical model tuning when the real gap is governance can be the wrong audit move, because auditors verify controls and accountability rather than redesigning systems. The workflow gives you a priority order. First, establish understanding. then verify requirements and governance, then evaluate control design and operation, then verify monitoring and improvement. Even when the question is short, you can silently place it into this sequence. That mental placement often reveals which answer is the most audit-appropriate rather than the most exciting. Another beginner trap is treating the domains as separate checklists rather than connected questions about the same system. If you memorize Domain 1 facts, Domain 2 policies, and Domain 3 monitoring ideas without connecting them, you might feel prepared but still miss scenario questions. Scenario questions reward integration because real AI risks do not respect domain boundaries. A weak requirement in the early stage leads to poor control design, and poor control design leads to weak monitoring signals, and then small problems become large ones. The exam often tests whether you see that chain. When you read a scenario, try to identify the earliest point where the chain started to break, because auditors often focus on root causes rather than symptoms. If a model is producing harmful outcomes, the most important question might be whether the organization defined acceptable outcomes and documented constraints before deployment. That line of thinking comes straight from viewing the domains as stages of one workflow. It also helps to keep a simple evidence mindset attached to the workflow because audits are ultimately evidence-based. In the first stage, evidence might include a clear description of the system's purpose, documented scope, and identified stakeholders. In the second stage, evidence might include documented requirements, risk assessments, approvals, and defined control responsibilities. In the third stage, evidence might include monitoring metrics, review records, incident handling documentation, and proof of corrective actions. You do not need to memorize specific artifacts as a list to benefit from this mindset. Instead, remember that every stage should produce something verifiable that shows intent, execution, and oversight. When an answer choice relies on belief, informal assurance, or vague confidence, it tends to be weaker than an answer choice grounded in documented evidence and repeatable process. This evidence mindset pairs naturally with the domain workflow and makes your decisions more consistent under time pressure. As you move forward, keep practicing the habit of translating any AI conversation into the same three-part journey, because repetition builds speed. When someone describes an AI solution, ask yourself what it is and what it impacts. Then ask what the organization claims it should do and what constraints apply. Then ask how it is controlled and how it is monitored over time. That is the entire workflow in plain language, and it maps to domains 1 through 3 without you needing to force it. The more you do this, the more the exam begins to feel like recognizing patterns rather than answering random questions. You will also find that your confidence increases because you have a stable method, not just scattered facts. That confidence matters for beginners because it reduces panic and keeps your reading accurate. In the next topics, we will deepen each stage with clearer AI fundamentals and audit-style thinking, but the workflow you built here will remain your anchor for everything that follows.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.